What's up everyone? In today's video we're going to talk about how to throw a soft plastic jerkbait. So in today's video we're going to break down everything you need to know in order to throw soft plastic jerkbaits and catch more fish. And we're going to focus a lot on a Zoom Super Fluke and a Strike King caffeine shad. Those are two baits that I have a lot of confidence in, and I like to throw those two almost all the time. So if I'm throwing a soft plastic jerkbait, one of those two is the bait that I'm going to be throwing. So let's get both of those out and we'll kind of take a look at the differences and some of the similarities. There's a lot of soft plastic jerkbaits out there on the market, but some are better than others, but a lot of them will catch fish. It's just a matter of which ones you have confidence in. Kind of pick a couple of them that you like and stick with it. So as you can see, the Zoom Super Fluke is a little bit shorter than the Strike King caffeine shad, and the caffeine shad also has more of like almost like a worm tail for the end, whereas the Zoom Super Fluke has a split forked tail. But they both have the slit in the center that is used for putting your hook in there, and I rigged these both up the exact same way. The baits just have a little bit different action, so one day versus the other they might like the Super Fluke better than the caffeine shad. But as you can see, this caffeine shad has like a flat spot behind where you would put the hook, and that kind of allows it to kind of plane out a little bit more than say the Super Fluke. The Super Fluke has just got a real good side-to-side action, which this does too, but it's got a little bit of a different action because of that little flat spot behind there. Those are the two that I pretty much live and die by. If they're not eating those two, then I'm gonna throw something else probably. So let's go through some of the colors that I like, and then we'll break down how I rig it up and certain things that you can do to make it act differently and get a few more bites. So as you can see, I keep it pretty simple as far as color. I either have shad color, green pumpkin, or pink. And the pink, a lot of people think it's funny, but they will really bite this bait in the springtime. It's kind of like throwing a pink trick worm in the springtime when those fish get up and they're just roaming around the banks getting ready to spawn, or post-spawn right after the spawn. They really eat a Zoom trick worm. Same way with this, that for some reason they like that real obnoxious, ugly looking color. But as far as like shad patterns, I have Arkansas Shiner, I have albino, white pearl, and then I have white ice, which a lot of times whenever I think the white pearl is a little bit too much, I'll throw that white ice and it's a little bit more translucent, but it's still pretty bright. And then blue glimmer. So those are a few of the colors that I throw whenever I'm targeting like shad, like if the fish are eating shad, those are a few of those colors. A lot of times I throw white a lot of times, and it's kind of weird because the water could be really clear. For example, I was at Lake Hartwell fishing the All-American and I threw white and the fish loved it. And you would think that on a really clear lake like that, where the fish are coming up and looking at your bait, that they would probably steer away from such a bright color, but they don't. I don't know if it's just because they come from such a long way and they can see it farther or what, but they love that color down there. So don't be afraid to throw a white fluke in some of the clearest water around. But if there's days where those fish aren't hitting the white, then I'll have the more natural colors, like the albino is a good color, or this blue glimmer is another good color. And you want to make sure that when you put these baits in your boat, that you got your baits pretty much straight. So you'll see how some of them aren't quite perfect, but you'll see how these baits are sitting in here just perfectly straight. I want to keep them straight because if they don't, and the tails get bent or something, it's going to affect the way those dart back and forth, and it's really going to mess up the action. You may not even be able to get it to work the way you want it to. So another thing I'll do is I'll throw these Magnum flukes, and it's a 7-inch Super Fluke, so it's a lot bigger. You can use this around larger bait. So if you're around some really big gizzard shad or something and you want to throw a bigger bait to get the fish's attention, that's a good bait to throw. It's a 7-inch Zoom Magnum Super Fluke. And also the opposite way, they have a Super Fluke Junior. So whenever I get like around really tiny bait, what I'll throw is this little Super Fluke Junior, and I'm not sure how long that is. It's probably like 4 inches long, but it's a lot smaller than the other Super Fluke. So you'll see the size difference there. It's there's a decent size difference between the three of them. This is the standard size, the Magnum size, and the Junior size. But majority of the time I'm throwing the standard size, but like I said, if there's smaller bait or larger bait, I'll step up or down to the size of the bait based on that. So now let's talk about hooks that I use. A lot of times I use an unweighted EWG hook. I always use an EWG hook for flukes. It allows that bait to really come through and you get better hookups that way. For the standard size, I'll throw a 5/0 EWG. A lot of guys will throw like a 3/0 or a 4/0. For some reason, I like the 5/0. I don't know if it's because it allows the bait to fall a little bit faster, or if I just get better hookups with that 5/0. I know some guys will not go any bigger than a 4/0 on that standard size, but I like a 5/0 G Finesse. It's a hybrid worm hook, and it's really sharp hook. It works great for this Fluke. That's pretty much the only hook that I'll throw on that Fluke, unless I'm adding weight to it. The Magnum one, I'll throw the same hook, but it's in a 7/0. So it's that hybrid worm again, 7/0. Same thing with the smaller Junior. With the Junior, I'll throw a 2/0, and it's still the hybrid worm. But then, if you want to get really tricky with it, you can add some weights to it. You can use these belly weighted. So like at Hartwell, whenever I was fishing around some deeper like cane piles and stuff, those fish were in like 20 foot of water, and I wanted my bait to get a little bit deeper. And so in order to do that, I would throw my bait out there with like an 1/8 ounce belly weight on there. And I did a lot of experimenting with it. Honestly, I think you don't get as good of a hookup whenever you do this as if you were throwing it with a EWG hook. But if you have to do it, this weight adds a little bit extra weight to it. You can fish that bait and get it down there to where those fish are. Like for example, this is a 6/0 with a 1/4 ounce weight on it. That would be a good one for this Magnum Zoom Fluke. And then I have some 1/8 ounce with 5/0 hooks, which would work for like the standard size. Another thing that guys have started doing is they'll take this owner cover shot, which is like a drop shot hook essentially, and they'll just thread it right through the top of it. So then it's not weedless, but they'll basically thread it through the top of it like that. So they'll kind of put it in there and go all the way through, and then you'll have that hook sitting out the back side of it like that. And so if a fish comes up and eats it, they're getting hooked regardless. It's not weedless or texposed, and you're gonna get more hookups whenever you do end up getting a bite doing that. The only thing with that is I feel like you don't get the action. Like if you're just twitching it, you're not gonna get that action that you're wanting with that bait. However, there was times like at Hartwell where I was just reeling my bait as fast as I could, and those fish would just inhale it. So in that case, if you had that top hook, you would probably catch more fish than if you were using the EWG hook. Another way to add weight to your bait is a nail weight. So you could take a nail weight, like for example, this is an 1/8 ounce nail weight, and I can take it after I have my hook into my bait. And in order to hook these baits, what I'll do is I'll basically go maybe a 1/4 inch in, then twist it around just like you would be doing like a Texas rig or something, and then put it through that split belly and make sure you get it all centered up, and then I'll kind of hook that bait back in there a little bit to keep it more weedless. But when I want to add my nail weight, what I'll do is if I want it in the, it kind of depends where I want it. A lot of times I'll want it in the front of the bait, So if I want to do that, basically I'll take it and right where the split gap starts, I'll just take that nail weight and I'll just shove it in there, and that'll add 1/8 ounce of weight to that bait, and it'll allow the bait to get down a little bit farther. So if you don't want to throw these swim bait belly weighted hooks, you can add weight with just a nail weight like that. That was another thing that I tried at Hartwell and messed around with that. I ended up going back to just a standard Fluke with a standard 5/0 hook and keeping the bait as high as I could and basically trying to keep it away from them. So there's a few different ways that you can fish this bait. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll just do like 2 twitches and then a pause, 3 twitches and then a pause, and I'll just kind of mix it up. But I try to twitch it really hard and get that bait to just go side to side crazy, and it really gets those fish's attention and hopefully gets them to bite. But at Hartwell, what I was doing is I was basically just burning my bait as fast as I could and then killing it, and then burning it and then killing it. And what it does is it essentially just does that. Like you'll pull it like 5 feet and then it'll stop and start sinking. And you'll pull it like 5 feet and it'll stop and start sinking. So it's not doing the like side to side action, but it's going crazy when you pull it through the water like that. So it gets their attention. They would come up from like 20 feet deep and hit that soft jerk bait, but that's one way to fish it. Another way would be to jerk pause, or like summertime months, whenever the fish are a little bit more active or schooling or something, you could twitch just a constant twitch. Sometimes those fish will want you to pause it. Sometimes they'll want you to keep working it really fast. So it's kind of just a trial and error thing, and every day is a little bit different. So just basically try different cadences with your bait. If you have live scope, you can watch the way the fish react to your bait. So that helps a little bit. Or you can just try different techniques until you figure out which way those fish want it for that given day. So one thing that is important to know whenever you're rigging up this bait is the further you put your hook back, the more flat it's going to float in the water. So if you have your you have your hook forward, it's going to be front heavy and your bait's going to be sitting like nose down. And that'll allow your bait, when you go to twitch it, to kind of go down a little bit more. Whereas if you have your hook back further, it's going to be sitting flat and it's going to stay up higher in the water. So if you want your bait to be flickering on the surface, rig that hook back a little bit. And to do that, what you do is you just put the hook in the nose of the bait and take it almost back to where that split starts. Pull it all the way through, twist it around until that hook comes out there, and then take that hook through the split, come out the other side, and make it perfectly straight. Make sure you get it all the way in the center, because if you don't, then it's going to kind of mess with the action a little bit. But you'll notice that this hook is all the way back almost to the tail, and this line tie is like way up in here. So that bait's gonna sit a lot more like straight and level, and I don't think that has as much action, but that'll allow you to keep your bait up a little higher. So the way I like to rig it is I like to come out probably right between the belly gap and the nose. So that's about 1/4 of an inch. And when I do that, like I said, you got to make sure it's straight every time. Twist that around. Go through the split belly. And then make sure that's straight. And when you do that, you'll notice this bait had come up like 1/4 of an inch further towards the head. Same way with this nose, this line tie, it's like almost out of the bait. So when you do that, your bait's going to be a little bit nose heavy. Not necessarily nose heavy, but definitely more than what it was when I rigged that hook a little bit back further. So that bait's going to sit down a little bit lower, and when you twitch it, it's going to almost like pull down more, so it's going to stay like 1 foot or so below the surface. And I like to fish it like that a lot more than like jumping on the surface. But just a small little change like that can change the way your bait works. So it's something good to know whenever you're rigging your bait up, to pay attention to that and see how that bait reacts based on where that hook comes out the first time below that nose. So finally, let's talk about rod and reel. I like to throw my flukes on a spinning rod. A lot of people throw it on a bait casting rod, but a spinning rod, to me, I can really launch a 5-inch fluke out there really far, weightless. I can't cast it as good with a bait caster. I can do it, but a lot of times when I throw like the weighted flukes, that's whenever I'll throw them on a bait caster. But a lot of people laugh at me because I have an old Skeet Reese rod, but this is a rod that I've found to it works a super fluke really good, and it's just a 610 medium fast action rod, and I'm able to work that bait really good and get good hook sets on those fish. Even when it's way out there on a really long cast, that rod can really drive the hook home, but it also has that tip to where I can work the bait and really get that good side-to-side action that'll draw those bites. As far as line, a lot of times I'll throw a 10 to 12 pound braid main line with a anywhere from an 8 to 10 pound leader. So a lot of times I'll throw 10 just because when they do bite, I really set the hook pretty hard to drive that hook home. This really isn't like a thin hook that I use. So with a spinning rod, I want a little bit more give, I guess, on my line to make sure that I don't break my line. If I throw like 6 or 8, I might get a few more bites, but it's going to risk breaking off a fish or whatever. So the 10 pounds also not going to let my bait fall as fast, whereas the 6 or the 8's going to have less drag and it's going to fall a little bit faster in that water. So as far as bait casters, I like to throw, same thing, I like to throw 10 pound test, and I throw, a lot of times when I'm throwing my bait caster, I'm either throwing the Magnum fluke or I'm throwing them on a heavier weighted hook. So I'll throw a 710 medium heavy, and that's actually a spinnerbait rod, and I throw that with a high-speed gear ratio like a 7.5 to 1. And basically the reason for that is I want to be able to pick up the line whenever a fish hits. A lot of times they'll come from behind the bait and they'll hit it and they'll just keep running, and when they do that, it's hard to catch up to them. They could be almost to the boat by the time you end up getting a hook set in them. So I like a fast gear ratio so that I can catch up to them. This rod's a little bit stiffer than like my normal like hard jerkbait rod, so I can drive the hook home a little bit. Like I said about the other hooks, these aren't really necessarily, I mean, this is a big swim bait hook, so you want to be able to drive that hook home, and you can't really do that with a flimsier rod. So the 610 medium heavy is the rod that I go with, and I throw that on 10 pound test, or I'll even go up to either 12 or 15 in order to get those fish. But that pretty much sums up the rods and reels, the colors that I throw, the hooks that I do, some of the ways that you can rig the bait in order to make it act a little bit differently, make it fall a little bit faster with the nail weights or the weighted swim bait hooks. So hopefully that video was helpful. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit along the way. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.